And now to introduce our second ethical dilemma for this episode, we have Lindsay, our guest host. And Lindsay, why don't you just go ahead and take it away?
Thanks so much. Yeah, so I think for our second ethical dilemma, the question relates to genetic engineering, which is a little bit different than what was presented in the movie Flowers for Algernon, but I think it's certainly a relevant idea to what was presented. And that is, I like to think of the old adage, just because you can doesn't mean that you should. I think this comes up a lot in scientific research because I think scientists and clinicians come from a good place. I say this as someone who trained for a long time in science, but we can easily sort of become a victim of this tunnel vision of how to fix things. And suddenly everything becomes a hammer, and you don't necessarily talk to the communities involved, or you're not talking to the people who are involved. You're just trying to fix things. And so I think in this particular case, one important thing with genetic engineering is to differentiate what's called somatic gene therapy or somatic genetic engineering versus germline genetic engineering. And so when we talk about somatic gene therapy or engineering, this is when we alter the cells in the body that don't produce eggs or sperms, so you can't pass these alterations on to subsequent generations. This is different from germline gene therapy or genetic engineering, where this is happening to egg cells or sperm, and you actually can pass these alterations down onto subsequent generations. And so I think a lot of when we think about gene therapy or genetic engineering these days, obviously one of the big things that comes to mind is something like CRISPR-Cas9 or CRISPR 2.0. And I'm going to test myself here because I swear no matter how many times I try to learn this, I'm going to try my best to say what it is. So CRISPR is short for clustered, regularly interspaced palindromic repeats, which is, I did it. Science is many things, but full of difficult jargon is certainly one of them. But CRISPR is an incredibly precise tool, which is certainly better for how we move forward with things like gene therapy or genetic engineering, but it also opens up a huge host of things that we could alter. And I do want to give a shout out for women in science, because this past year, the 2020 Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded to Emmanuelle Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna for their work in the CRISPR system. So shout out to women in science. Even though there's a host of problems with Nobel Prizes, it's always nice to see women earning them. So, but I think when we talk about this precision tool, one of the big things that I think about in terms of the just because you can, doesn't mean that you should, is treating illness, treating disease, versus what we might call enhancements, right? So in theory, you could use these things to make these sort of quote unquote designer babies. And I think we can all agree that there's a lot there to unpack about what that would look like. In the movie, Dr. Strauss says to Charlie, "None of these babies will ever have to be like you were." And that hit me hard when I was watching the movie, because it's, I think what an egotistical place to be, to assume as the researcher that it's just as simple as that. And I think that more than anything is sort of the window into the ethics here is, is it so bad to have a baby, be born like Charlie? What does that mean, that none of these babies will ever have to be like you were? And I think that gets back to this idea that scientists and clinicians, while it comes from a really good place, are often trying to fix things and solve problems. But I think sometimes that good place is also an uninformed place.